How severe will the Falcons' alleged tampering punishment actually be?
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis and Aaron Freeman. And I know you missed us because we were off last week for the Memorial Day holiday. We missed you guys too, but we're back. So today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And the Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And you see us as a trio this week, but we promise we will go back to being, what is it, like a duo, trio,
Quartet.
Quartet. Yeah,
barbershop quartet or salon/barbershop quartet.
Yes, our quartet will be back in full swing next week. Our girl Tori is out of the country. Enjoy. Now, the Falcons also are resuming things this week with OTAs. We'll talk about what or who we have our eye on. Then we'll talk about a bucket list that might rival what Bijan Robinson did this weekend. But first, let's talk about tampering, guys. A resolution in the alleged free agent tampering cases of both the Atlanta Falcons and Philadelphia Eagles is likely to come this week, according to multiple sources. Now, the Falcons, of course, have been investigated for the contact they may or may not have had with then free agent QB Kirk Cousins before he signed with Atlanta. Now, one NFL league source indicated the Falcons' alleged transgressions are considered more significant and their discipline, therefore, will be more severe. Now, guys, let me take you back to 2023 to kind of see if that'll inform where you think we'll land in 24. The Miami Dolphins forfeited their 2023 first-round pick and a 2024 third-rounder for tampering with Tom Brady and Sean Payton on 3 occasions from 2019 to 2022. Their team owner, Stephen Ross, was fined $1.5 million, and vice chairman and their limited partner, Bruce Beal, was fined $500,000. What do you think, Jarvis, the result will be for these Falcons? And with your predicted outcome, will the Falcons suffer any real loss if they're found guilty of tampering?
I think first of all, I feel like this is probably going to skew towards what the Chiefs, got for tampering with Jeremy Maclin. Obviously, Andy Reid used to coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, so it was definitely some contact there. Maybe a mid-round pick and maybe a later round pick. Maybe a mid-round pick in 2025 and then a late-round pick in 2026. And obviously, Arthur Blank going to probably go to his piggy bank and pay a little fine, and then maybe Terry Fontenot as well. And also Raheem Morris is probably going to get fined as well. So I think it kind of skewed towards, what the Chiefs got, because in actuality, you think about it, there were multiple times. The Dolphins were just they were just doing whatever the hell they want. It's like, man, we want Sean Payton, we want Tom, we want to give you ownership. Like, they were just going all out, and there was multiple times that they reached out to him. So I feel like, given that I don't think the Falcons went that far, when it comes to Kirk Cousins. So I feel like this just in a space where, all right, okay, you weren't as bad as the Dolphins, so we probably gonna give you a little bit more than what the Chiefs did, because they probably, I was assume that they probably did a little bit more than what the Chiefs did, but they didn't go as far as with the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, I would have to agree, Aaron, with Jarvis, because if the Dolphins only had to give up a first-round pick last season and then the third rounder this season, and it was 3 years of tampering that we know of, and I'm sure there's probably more that they couldn't really find. And then, of course, the owners got fined as well. But I think, you would have to at least assume that there would be a downgrade in some way, shape, or form from that fine / loss of picks in totality.
Yeah, I'm like Jarvis. I assume it's going to be something like a third round pick, like what the Chiefs got, maybe a little bit more next year, and heavy fines. And to me, when you hear all these reports about like the Falcons are going to be more severe, is it like you're like, is it more severe than what the Chiefs got, or is it more severe than what the Eagles are expected to get as well?
Yeah.
Getting some clarity on that later this week, I think, will be welcome at this point in time, because it's like when you hear these words severe thrown around, people are like, oh no, like what does that mean? But yeah, you're right. The Dolphins, I think the report that came out that investigated the Dolphins when they got hammered last year was like, this is the most severe and egregious, like, case of tampering ever. Basically, the owner, Stephen Ross, was like flying Sean Payton and Tom Brady on his yacht and stuff, and just like throwing caution to the wind. Doesn't sound like the Falcons did all that. So I think the question is going to be like, does the league send the Falcons a message by throwing a little bit more extra on it? Because it's like, hey, the Falcons were so bad at tampering that Kirk Cousins basically admitted it at his introductory press conference. Like, at least hide it a little bit better. And so therefore,
kind of like back when they were piping the sound into the stadium.
Yeah.
Do better.
Bringing up old stuff again.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what the Falcons get penalized with, just because we know this team and this regime has had a tendency to try to trade these types of picks to move up in the draft. And now it's like, oh, well, now you're not going to have any ammunition to do the normal second round trade up that you like to do. And so does that mean, are we going to get a more likely trade back in next year's draft? But obviously, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah, that's what I do.
And one of the things that I thought about, I was just like, man, I started going on a rabbit hole. I was like, you know what? Maybe Terry Fontenot knew this was coming. And that's why he got a quarterback, because he knows Kirk Cousins is probably only going to be good for 1 year. And then you're like, you know what, man, a 37-year-old quarterback, we need a quarterback. But we ain't got no first round pick because the league can't put the hammer down. So let me go and get my quarterback this year. So, it's just so many different scenarios, because I feel like sometimes these teams got a pretty good idea of what's about to go down, before it happens. Like, of course, just like Adam Schefter has his sources, Arthur Blank has his sources. Rich McKay got all the sources, with the competition committee and everything, his kind of relevance with that. So I think that this is going to be very interesting how it turns out. And if it turns out to be a first round pick, I bet you people won't be complaining anymore that the Falcons drafted Michael Penix this year.
Yeah, and if you look at the timeline, that's not a rabbit hole that you went down, Jarvis. That's a legit option, because at the end of the day, that timeline would dictate that, hey, you might want to be careful with what you do with your first round pick this year. And you may have to be a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more ingenious in how you approach it, because there's a good chance you won't have one next year or even the following year. So that's not a bad one. And I also wanted to go back to what Free said, because I think he might be onto something as well. Like, maybe it falls in the middle. Maybe you don't lose two draft picks per se. Like, you don't lose a first rounder and a third rounder across 2 drafts, but maybe you lose a second rounder, because for the Falcons, that might actually hit you a little bit harder, because that is where they've had a lot of success, and that is where they usually will make their first and maybe most significant
need.
Yeah, exactly. That's where they switch up their draft philosophy.
Right, they change the draft status.
Exactly.
Draft for need now.
Exactly, they go from BPA to draft for need. So you guys might have some really creative and intuitive thoughts around why they will do what they do, or how it might impact them based on what the league thinks. So I think it is interesting also, Free, that you talked about the definition of severity and where the comparison lies. Is the comparison to what's going to happen to the Eagles this week? Is the comparison to what happened to the Dolphins? Or, to Jarvis's point, are you comparing way back to what happened with the Chiefs and Jeremy Maclin? Like, what's the definition of severity? It's going to be interesting to see. And of course, we're going to be following that throughout the week and having some reaction for you as well. But speaking of Cousins, Pro Football Focus identified him as the Falcons' biggest X factor heading into the 2024 season. And it's like, duh, that is Captain Obvious. So what I thought was more interesting, Free, was, I'll call it the next factor. So who's your next factor, X factor type person on offense, and who's your next factor on defense?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's on offense, it's got to be Drake London, and on defense, it's got to be Arnold Ebiketie. Like, the Falcons, I think, are sort of making 2 big bets on these 2 top 2022 draft picks for the Falcons. where you're expecting Drake London, or at least I'm expecting Drake London to be a very, very high volume wide receiver. We're going to talk a little bit more about the rest of the wide receiver core a little bit later in the episode, but like you look at that wide receiver room, it's like Drake London sort of stands out of that group of like, hey, if anybody's going to be out here getting 10 plus targets, and we've seen this Rams offense feature guys like that, whether you're talking about Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp in recent years, you've seen Kevin O'Connell with Jordan Jefferson in Minnesota in recent years, like someone is going to have to be, that sort of breadwinner each and every week. We haven't seen that consistently from Drake London. We've seen flashes of that ability. So we need that this season for this offense, I think, to work. And then on the defensive side of the ball, the Falcons pass rush has been a problem, is to put it kindly.
That's a nice way.
Very kind.
Better part of 2 decades. And, it looks like it might continue to be a problem this year. But I think the player that can do the most to prevent that problem from showing up again is potentially Arnold Ebiketie. If anybody in this group is going to, push towards double-digit sacks, right? Which the Falcons haven't had a guy like that in 8 years, and they barely had a guy like that 8 years ago. It's seemingly going to be Arnold Ebiketie. So I think both him and Drake London, that 2022 class, they're now entering year 3. This is the year usually where you see players in the NFL make that leap and make that jump to, if you're going to be a star in this league, usually it happens by now. And so I think for both Drake London and Arnold Ebiketie, that's what the Falcons need from him as next factors.
Yeah, for me, it has to be, in order for Kirk Cousins, who is the obvious X factor, like Tenitra mentioned, it has to be the offensive line. I got to go with the whole group. Jake Matthews has to stay healthy. Okay. He's been in the league. I know that's been something that we come to expect from him, but he is getting up there in age, so he has to be healthy. You think about what Drew Dalman brings to the table. He has to continue to progress and get better. Chris Lindstrom has to be the guy that we knew him to be towards the end of last year. He got out to a rough start last year. And then Caleb McGarry, is he going to be able to be, you talking about slinging the ball all around the yard and going 11 personnel and 3 wide receiver, 89%, 95% of the time? Yeah, man. So, but you got to be able to protect the passer too. And the only way you can protect the passer, with this offensive line, and specifically Caleb McGarry, you got to have some success running the football, I feel. Because that what slows that pass rush down. That helps those tackles, from those defensive ends or those edge guys coming off and, full speed and not have to worry about the run because they haven't been able to have any success with it. So I think overall on the offensive side of the ball, it has to be offensive line. And then on the defense side of the ball, it's to be determined. Like whoever's going to be the starter at that backside corner opposite AJ Terrell, that worries me because that has been an issue. It's been a big problem, and I feel like they've thrown a lot of guys' names in the pot, and they say they're going to, whoever rises to the top, hey, that's going to be the starter. So, and I'm cool with that. So, yeah, I feel like whoever is in that backside corner, opposite of AJ Terrell, I feel like that's going to be the person that could be potentially be the next factor, because when you got guys on both sides that are holding it down, and AJ Terrell, hopefully he bounced up to that all Pro Bowl type level that we expect from him. And then if you have a guy who's solid on the backside, all you got to do is be solid. And I feel like you have a combination of those two that'll help that pass rush that has been anemic, for the past 2 decades. Yeah, that'll help them out tremendously.
Yes. And since you went with the whole O-line, Jarvis, I'll switch mine because I had Caleb McGarry particularly as my next factor.
Shocking.
Yeah. So, yeah. He was going to be my next factor. But I'll switch it to Kyle Pitts. I think that he can be that next factor because we still have not, we saw shades of it in his rookie season, but we think there's so much more that can be there. And of course, I'm going to say Grady Jarrett because he is, like you said, a little bit older. And we don't know what the bounce back is going to look like from that injury from last season. So I think that's going to be intriguing to watch to see if Grady can be that Grady or come out with that fire that could make him even better. Now, the Falcons resume OTAs this week. We'll talk about what or who we have our eye on in the deep dive. This episode of our Atlanta football party is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 and $50 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So you visit FanDuel.com/locked on, and you can make every playoff shot count. And check this out. When you look at the NBA Finals, they do have Boston Celtics as winning it all -220, the Dallas Mavericks at a +184, and NBA Finals MVP Jason Tatum at -120, Luka Doncic a +200, Jaylen Brown a +600, and Kyrie Irving a +2000. And then when you look over at the Stanley Cup Final, they are picking the Edmonton Oilers. The spread is +1.5. Florida Panthers -1.5. Edmonton Oilers on money side +106. Florida Panthers -128. So some intriguing matchups there, and a great time for you to jump in with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, guys. So the Falcons return to action this week after, of course, virtual meetings last week. They begin today, Aaron, and then tomorrow they'll practice again. And of course, Thursday they'll wrap up before they get mandatory minicamp underway. What are you looking to see out of the Falcons this week?
More practice, practice makes perfect. All these types of things. I think at this point in the summer, you're sort of ramping up this pre-training camp process.
Yeah.
And for me, like, what are you exactly trying to accomplish? You're just trying to see, okay, are the rookies, are they sort of progressing at the rate that they need to progress in, right? Like, going through practice, like, they're fine. It's just like learning the offense, learning the defense, those types of things is what you're trying to see these guys do. So for me, just like, continue to progress with some of these young players as they try to pick up this stuff. And hopefully we'll see, those guys on track to sort of hit the ground running when we get later to training camp, and we can see some of these guys compete for some of these roster spots and how many snaps they're going to play and all that stuff. And then just, stay healthy, right? We saw an injury to the, I think it was the Saints or Broncos. I can't remember. Tano Passigno, he tore his Achilles last week.
Man, yeah.
And like, you just want to kind of stay healthy. Like, you don't want to have anybody. So, this was roughly the time I think Avery Williams got hurt last year and was out for the season. So that's the main thing at this point in time. Just the rookies continue to progress, and hopefully guys can stay healthy.
Yeah, I think so too, Jarvis. When I look at it from that perspective, I'm thinking not in addition to what Free said about the rookies, just continuing to see chemistry building up between, for example, Kirk Cousins and, his receivers, or like you said, looking to see if there are any inclinations of what this 2024 class can be on that pass rush side, just to see, okay, what are you showing us, Braylon Trace? Like, what are you really going to bring to the table? And are we seeing any inklings that tell us you could be that guy?
Yeah, I think overall that's the main thing, right? Because, like, as far as the veteran goes and Kirk Cousins and everything like that, obviously, yeah, he's been in the league for quite some time, but this is a new play caller. Same system. Obviously, there are going to be some things that are going to be different from what Kevin O'Connell did in Minnesota, in comparison to Zach Robinson. So I feel like Zach Robinson this is good for him too, right? Because he's getting around those guys, calling plays and doing his thing. Jimmy Lake, first time defense play caller, defense coordinator in NFL. He's getting that get into a rhythm and get into a flow of what they're supposed to do and what they kind of do from a practice standpoint. All that stuff, kind of like the preparation, all that stuff, like, matters. Like, just as much as it matters for the players, it matters for the coaches too. So I feel like what type of formations is he going to come out in, and, like, does he do like Arthur Smith? Arthur Smith love to come out in 12 personnel. Like, those first scripted plays, like, they kind of look the same, right? As far as with 12 personnel, 13 personnel, multiple tight ends. Is Zach Robinson going to come out in 11 personnel for the entire practice? Those are some of the things that I definitely want to be able to take a look at. So it's just all about getting the rhythm. The defense, the coordinators, getting into a rhythm, because, like I said, this is their first time calling plays in the NFL. So I think this is going to be just as good for them as it is for the players.
Yeah, and I think too, like Free said, the Falcons have been pretty fortunate in that injury department, other than obviously Ade Ogundeji going down, and we kind of saw what happened there, and they had to eventually move on. But yeah, hopefully you get some good fortune again because they really haven't had any players, especially any players of note, to go down early in the season. In a minute. Now, when the new league year officially began back in March, the Falcons had only one wide receiver on the roster, official, and that was the guy we talked about a little bit earlier in Drake London. Now, since then, another 13 have been added. And when I saw that number, it just kind of blew me away. And so I had to go and look at the depth chart. And I'm like, okay, yeah, they got to have like 13 wide receivers. But here's the question, Free. Of the 13 wide receivers, most of them are not really familiar. And certainly most of them are not familiar as game changers. So when you look at that and you see that it's the third largest position group for the Falcons, do you feel like that equates to quantity more than quality, or vice versa?
Yeah, it goes back to something we talked, or at least I talked about earlier, with the kind of Drake London being the guy. Like, I feel like it's more quantity at this point in time than quality. Like, they do have some guys in there in that room that are experienced, that have produced in this league. Guys like Darnell Mooney, guys like Rondell Moore, guys like Kadero Hodge. But like, you're not looking at that trio as like, oh man, this is one of the best sort of secondary, I guess you could say, trios of receivers in the NFL. It's like Drake London, and then it's like you got some guys that are pretty good, and then you have a whole bunch of other guys that you're just like, sure, let's see what that person could do. Maybe, there's always like one wide receiver in training camp that always is popping off, and everybody's like, oh, this guy's incredible, and then like they make the practice squad, and then like a year later, you've never heard of that player ever again. But we'll see if any of these guys can kind of emerge in that group. But it does feel like it's basically Drake London, Darnell Mooney, and some people also there that are like, I've heard of those guys before, but I don't know if I'm expecting any of these guys to have like a huge, season or anything like that. So it does feel like more quantity over quality.
Yeah. And Jarvis, I wonder, because it feels like more quantity over quality, if that kind of tips the hands in some way, shape, or form whenever defensive coordinators are scheming for what the Falcons are going to do in the passing game. But yeah, that room. And then even when you look at guys like Darnell Mooney, you're thinking to yourself, okay, but which one is going to show up? Like, how much are you going to get out of even the guys outside of Drake?
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because I go back to 2016 when the offense was just going all over the doggone place, and we knew what Julio Jones was going to bring to the table, but when it comes to that secondary guy, Taylor Gabriel went off, right? He was a guy that just Kyle Shanahan just put that dude in positions just to be amazing, in that particular year, to the tune of averaging 33 points per game that in that particular season. So that's what I'm thinking about when I'm looking at this offense and this wide receiver group, right? Like, who's going to be that secondary guy? Because like Aaron mentioned, I'm expecting Drake London to have a really good season this year. But is Darnell Mooney going to be able to be that wide receiver too, and be able to be that guy, to take advantage of all of the attention that Drake London potentially is going to get, once the season gets rolling? So yeah, and being that when he was in Chicago, he's not wide receiver one, and that was the kind of the role that he was kind of forced into. And we know what the quarterback situation was, and the offensive coordinators and all that. It's just a whole bunch of crap going on, and he was still somehow able to manage to get 1,000-yard season out of that. So I feel like Mooney should be that guy to step into like a Taylor Gabriel type role. I hate to compare it to that offense because that's a lot of pressure, because there's a lot of points. But when you think about having that secondary wide receiver, and who your primary guy is, I feel like Darnell Mooney should be able to step into that role, or maybe a Rondell Moore can be able to step into that role, from the slot standpoint. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting how this offense plays out. So. And I'm glad. I'm all for competition. I hear you even talked about it. Being a former wide receiver himself, he understands it. So I'm all for that. So for them to kind of load up on that position and say, hey, here's a guy that we can potentially have at our wide receiver 2 spot in Mooney, and then we could bring in another couple of fast guys that they can kind of separate and get deep downfield, because the quarterback that we have, he's really good at throwing the deep ball. So yeah, I'm all for it. Let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens, and maybe you'll get a turn like a Puka Nacua with a lot of returns and a lot of intrigue around what Casey Washington might be able to do. So we shall see. When we come back, we're going to tell you guys a little bit about what might be on our bucket list that will rival something Bijan Robinson did this weekend. We'll download on it in What's Next. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Now, think about this. With the priority ticket purchase, you can actually save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Now, not saying you don't want to buy your Usher ticket in advance, but what if you can't buy it in advance? Well, this might be your opportunity at the last minute to get in on one of those 6 Usher concerts that's coming to the A. Also, they have flash deals in the Game Time app. You can save with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. So here's how you do it. You can take the guesswork out of buying your NBA Finals tickets, your Usher concert tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's Locked On NFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So when we take a look at, and of course we'll talk a little bit about our bucket list in a minute, but I wanted to ask you guys this question because I saw an article about basically a 4-tier ranking system for the NFL offenses. CBS Sports released that maybe sometime last week, but of course we were off last week, so I want to talk about it this week. They ranked the Atlanta Falcons and this Kirk Cousins-led offense with the Chicago Bears, the New York Jets, the Los Angeles Chargers, Indianapolis Colts, and the Cleveland Browns. And then when you look at the list in its totality, the Falcons were only ranked 16th out of 32 teams, which I don't know about you guys, but for me, that's a bit of a head scratcher because, again, we just had this conversation. Granted, Aaron, you don't have a whole lot in the way we went, all 3 said quality versus quantity as far as the wide receiver room goes, but that guy under center will still be that guy under center. So think about this. I'll throw out some of the criteria, the weighted grading system, where they would rank terrible, average, or elite. Then they had like first, second, and third tiebreakers for the quarterback himself. And then they also kind of rated on what an individual might have done over the last couple of years. So taking all of those things into consideration free, I still feel like 16th is low.
Yeah, it is. But at the same time, like it's been a good little while since the Falcons have had like a top 10 offense. Like 2018 is probably the last time. Yeah. And I think this kind of tells you where the rest of the league has been the last, I guess, 5 years, where like you look at the Falcons' talent on their offense, and they do have a talented group of players, but it's not as if like you look around the rest of the league and there's a bunch of other teams that lack talent as well. And I think that's kind of what this list is kind of telling you. Like, yeah, especially with the Falcons and a lot of unproven pieces at this point in time, it's hard to kind of rank them in the top 10, even though I think a lot of us are expecting them that when all is said and done, this should be a top 10 offense with all the pieces that they have. But with, you know, you don't know what Zach Robinson is. You don't know what Kirk Cousins is going to be coming off his Achilles, as we just talked about. Like Drake London has all the ability, and Kyle Pitts has all the ability in the world, and Bijan has all the ability in the world to be these sort of dominant, you know, star players. But none of those guys have really shown it consistently at this point in time. And your offensive line, which, you know, is one of the strengths of your offense, you know, is coming off a bit of an up and down season. So I think 16 is fair at this point in time, just because like you don't know a lot yet, but it also is kind of speaking to the rest of the league where it's just like, yeah, there's, you know, when we look at what a true blue top 10 offense looks like the Falcons haven't proven that yet. And so when I see them 16, it feels low, but at the same time, when I scroll through the list and look at the other teams ranked ahead of them, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I can really like dispute too many of those as being fair ones.
Okay. I, however, feel like there are a couple you can dispute. And I agree with you, Free. I do not feel like they're top 10, no question. But I felt like they were top third, which would have put them like right in that 11 or 12 spot. I think that for me, it's tough to see a Colts, and granted, Colts and Browns were in their tier, but they ranked ahead of them in their tier. And I'm like, you don't even know what Anthony Richardson is going to be. And we don't know what Deshaun Watson is going to be coming off that injury. So I felt like,
whoa. We know what Deshaun Watson has been, T. Is nothing since he's come back. He has been nothing since he's come back from the all of his transgressions and stuff. Yeah, he ain't been jacked.
Right. And that's right. Like, we have not seen that guy, even when we saw that guy, he wasn't him. And I think too, kind of for me, when I looked at just like I said, that top of the tier 3, because I didn't think they should be in anywhere in the top third. But I was like, okay, Vikings, same thing. You just drafted JJ McCarthy, but I guess they're giving the credence to having a Justin Jefferson and being able to have that kind of offense. And with the Cowboys, okay, fine, whatever. Like, I mean, okay, I'm not going to go.
They graded the Vikings on the curve, T. Let's keep it fun. Let's keep it fun.
Yeah. I just felt like, well, if you're giving away ties, and the Vikings are 13th, and then the Cowboys and the Ravens are tied for 11th. I mean, couldn't the Falcons be like tied for 11th? Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, the Vikings one stands out to me too, T. Like, because when you think about Sam Darnold potentially being a starter, because I mean, unless JJ McCarthy just comes in and just wows the crap out of him, so he was essentially brought in to be a bridge quarterback. I think he's making like $10 million, $8, $9, $10 million or something like that. You don't pay a guy like that, to be a backup. Man, that's some expensive backup money. So you would think that they probably want to bring JJ in to be a guy that can kind of slowly ease him in, maybe 5th or 6th game of the season, probably end up being a starter. So when you have that type of conversation, I'm sorry, like, you can't be in the top that third tier, right? Because the guy that just left there was responsible for some of those numbers. He was throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson, right? Not saying that Kirk Cousins should get all the credit for that, because Justin Jefferson is an amazing athlete. However, the guy that was doing all those numbers up there in Minnesota is now here in Atlanta. So I feel like, I'm not saying that they should be top 10 or top 10. Definitely not saying that. But there are just some ones where I have questions about, like the ones you mentioned with the Colts and obviously the Vikings, because I feel like JJ McCarthy is going to get somebody fired. So there's that.
Right. Oh my goodness gracious. All right, so we'll wrap up with a quick rapid fire. Bijan Robinson had the opportunity to throw out the first pitch at the Savannah Bananas game this past weekend. Of course, that's the exhibition baseball team that's pretty similar to what we saw and have seen out of the Harlem Globetrotters over the years. So it made me think about the bucket list and kind of what you and Jarvis, what you guys would want to do as, hey, man, if I had an opportunity to throw out a first pitch or do something cool like that, what would it be?
I mean, if we're doing full bucket list, let's throw out the first pitch in the World Series,
Okay.
The Atlanta Braves versus whoever, let's go all the way to the top, if we're going to throw out a first pitch, let's do it in front of national, television, and hopefully, if in this fantasy of mine, I've trained for it, so I won't, pull a Snoop Dogg or 50 Cent or whoever, all these terrible first pitches that you see, just get it over the plate. Like, I feel like I can do that, but, apparently that's harder than we think, at least for the celebrities.
Right.
Yeah, for me, you know what it is, T. I want to sing the national anthem at the World Series with the Braves. Like, let me get that. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, Aaron, yeah, yeah, let me get that. I need that. You know what I mean?
That's the theme. That is the theme. And Aaron said he's going to train, right? He's going to train.
Yes, I got to train. Of course.
Now we know he can get it.
I'm going to go with that. You know what I mean?
My World Series is going to be, which is going to be the only reason I can probably be objective, is to be the sideline reporter for the Atlanta Braves versus the New York Yankees, my two favorite teams in all of baseball. But that would help me to be an objective sideline reporter, because if it was just the Braves versus somebody else, it would be tough for me. But if it's the Braves and Yankees, I'll just sit on the fence like I always do when those two teams play together.
Blank the Yankees. Blank the Yankees. Yes. On this side. Yes. That's how I feel.
Our Atlanta football party, regardless of Jarvis's obvious disdain for my bucket list. This is still your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk anyway. And you all know that if we had a bucket list for the Falcons and we could do a coin toss at the Super Bowl, all three of us would do it. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we're free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We'll see you tomorrow on the Atlanta Football Party, the Dogs edition.